You can get testing and you can get antibody-based testing and you can see, okay, have you been exposed? So you guess that you might be exposed. If you have really high antibody titers, if you're using a technique that actually measures titers, that could be indicative of an active infection. Or it also could be indicating just an overactive immune system because of response to another infection. So you really don't know. And that's why using antibody measurements as your only source of diagnostics is challenging. The reason I really like direct detection is because it tells you, it's an indicative that you have the infection that's on board right now. If you have DNA of the pathogen in your blood, or you have proteins that are shed by the pathogen in your urine, then that's telling you that this is likely contributing to your health problems right now. And so we have some antibody based tests, we have direct tests, and we'll continue to build in both because they're useful not only for diagnosis, but treatment monitoring and so forth. And so understanding how and what that means to your current health condition, that direct testing is key.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to jump to some questions here. Tracy, does Galaxy have clinical advisors to help with testing data? And so what that means, like the FDN perspective, if we run any tests through our stuff, we can book in with a clinical advisor, which a lot of them are Lyme literate, Tracy, so they could probably help with a lot of this stuff. And there's certainly many of them are co-infection literate as well. But do you guys have anything directly at Galaxy, or maybe something with Mosaic now?
Yeah, Mosaic has some clinical support. We at Galaxy also, we take this very seriously. So we don't have a provider per se at this point, although we do have multiple clinical advisory board members that slot in for particular discussions if needed. But we talk, our head of clinical sales and also our head of R&D. We're often on calls discussing patient results and sharing things. We're very involved with the cases that we support and really trying to understand what's leading to some of these positive results and assimilating and sharing them with other providers so that we can really advance the knowledge in the space.
Look how crazy this is. Angela said, Pennsylvania, born and raised here. We've all had Lyme disease. I don't know anybody in Western PA who hasn't had someone in their family diagnosed. And
Yeah.
again, we know the diagnosing is not perfect.
Yeah.
So that's insane to read.
It
Wow.
is. I mean, I was just in DC last week doing an educational event for Congress. And I said, we have 500,000 people that we know of that are diagnosed and treated. That's diagnosed and treated. And so with a test that's 50% accurate, how many people are we missing? How many people running around with alternate diagnoses? Like it's unacceptable. And I think people up in Pennsylvania and in some of the other endemic areas really get it because you're right in Ground Central. But we also talked to a lot of people in other states. It's like, we don't have Lyme in our area. And it's like, come on. And even if that was true, does nobody ever travel? Like, it's just, there's still a lot of misinformation that's out there. And that's one of the things we're trying to combat and give people the science. What does the science say? And because that at the end of the day will be what ends up winning.
Yeah, and then of course the whole topic of they think half these things can only come from ticks, which is not true. And then
Right.
two, they think that they would notice a tick. The amount of times I've heard someone say, "Oh, I would notice a tick crawling on me." No, you would not.
Yeah.
They are so subtle and so small. Like you could be looking. The amount of times that I've been looking and I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing's halfway up my freaking leg right now in a hike or whatever. So we don't need to talk about this today. This is something that they could easily look up on YouTube. But guys, make sure you take the time to educate yourselves on tips for hiking, tips for gardening, whatever. There are some things that you can do because I'm sure prevention is probably the number one thing here, right? If we could just stop it to begin with, that's
Right.
obviously ideal. But even that is, if you work outside or you're hiking in certain areas every week, I just cannot imagine you not having one of these things on your body at some point. Now, whether it transmits a disease, whether it's on long enough for it to do that's a whole separate thing, but you got to take at least the basic precautions. Do you have any? Again, I know you probably don't want to touch on that as much because it's not fun or as fun and nerdy, but are there any prevention like tools and tricks or hacks that you have? Any sprays that you recommend, clothing recommendations? I don't know.
Yeah, I personally at my house we use a lot of the Sawyer products, so permethrin on clothes and picaridin on bodies. I use actually those tick control tubes. I don't know if you've seen those, but it's basically permethrin coated cotton you put in little tubes around your property. And what happens is, because people think about deer because of the deer tick, but actually young ticks live on mice. And so what happens is these cotton swabs are soaked in permethrin, which is toxic to the ticks. The mice take it, they put it in their burrows, and then their bodies are covered with permethrin and it kills all the young ticks. And so I put
Mhm.
those around my yard to help protect, because before I started doing kind of yard prevention, my dogs were constantly bringing ticks into the house.
Yeah.
And since I started doing yard protection, we don't see any. And so I think that's
Wow.
really key, because you got to have a safe space, right? You have to have a place where you can feel comfortable. And with all the PTSD after my husband's illness, it was like I couldn't feel like I could even relax inside my own home,
I
because
get
the dogs were just bringing ticks inside. And so getting that control over the area was key for me to just get over some of that anxiety.
It's such a good point about the dogs as well. Just another thing we don't think about. It's like we have her still. I just don't live at my family's house full time. A little Shishan, and so she has white fur, and it's easy enough to see this stuff. But the amount of times like we've checked her real quick, and she brought something in. It's sad because it was just last year. She doesn't have any symptoms, and as much as we can see, she's a dog. But she had one of the ticks, and we sent it out. PA has one of the free labs to test the tick itself,
Mm.
and it did have Lyme disease on it. So we don't know how long it was on her and all that kind of stuff, but like, we try. We're aware
Yeah.
of this stuff, looking for it. And so you can't even comprehend what it's like for the person that just doesn't even realize that this is an issue, or thinks that it's not in their state just because it's not as prevalent as something like Pennsylvania, and crazy as it is up there. This is still other places, folks. Let's buff out some more questions. And I will, if Nicole allows me, I'll steal an extra like 5-10 minutes of her time since you guys are throwing
Yeah.
some good stuff in. What is the difference between the 1-day panels versus the 3-day panels, the test kits? What is the benefit? I should have my glasses on. Sorry. What is the benefit of each? Again, sorry if this info has been covered. I don't think we have.
Yeah, no. So this is a great question. So the 3-day panels were really started out of our knowledge of Bartonella, because Bartonella is, as I said, there's links to mental illness, there's links to rheumatoid arthritis and lots of other chronic conditions, endocarditis in your heart. And so the life cycle, Bartonella actually can live in the endothelial cells of your vasculature. And the life cycle is it only cycles in and out of the blood once every 7 days. And so what was found at the research over at NC State, so our founder, Dr. Ed Breichwart, is literally like the one of the leading experts, if not the leading expert on Bartonella. They found that because it cycles in and out of the blood on this kind of 7-day cycle, if you did 3 draws within a 7-day period, you were much more likely to get a positive with a direct testing result. And so that's where the 3-day draw came from. 1-day draws are really just because sometimes 3-day draws are difficult to get, and because you will get positives, but you might not necessarily get to the best possible sensitivity just because of that cyclical nature. But one of the things that we're finding is that it's also helping with Babesia detection, and that we're getting better results with the 3-day draw with Babesia. And again, I think this is just because these are low abundance infections. And I think that the example that Dr. Breichwart always uses is if I'm sitting in a boat and I have a bucket and I put the bucket in the ocean and I look in it and I don't see any jellyfish, right? Does that mean that there's not any jellyfish in the ocean? No, it doesn't mean. So the amount that you take and the cycling and when you draw the blood matters. And for these low abundance infections, having these multiple draws increases the probability of detection. So
So
we
smart.
realize that's not accessible for everybody, especially for patients that may have difficult getting to phlebotomy. And so we do the 1-day draw as well. But for best results, the 3-day draws is the best option.